Topic today is Secure Access for Your Hybrid Workforce, a SASE strategy guide. Burwood is thrilled to partner with Cisco on today's session. A little about us. Burwood Group is an IT consulting firm headquartered in Chicago with offices and employees across the U.S. We help our clients leverage technology to transform their IT infrastructure environments. One of our valued partners in this transformation journey is Cisco Systems. Cisco provides innovative software-defined networking, security, and cloud solutions to help transform your business, empowering an inclusive future for all. I'd like to remind everyone that today's webinar is the second of a three-part series on SASE. If you enjoyed today's session, you don't want to miss the final session scheduled for late May. So stay tuned for those details. And you can catch the first session on Burwood's Group YouTube channel. A few housekeeping items. We've allocated about 45 minutes for today's session, and we're recording this session. A recorded version of this webinar will be available and sent to all registrants. If you have any questions throughout, please use the chat and QA window on the right side of your WebEx browser, and we'll get to as many as we can. Thank you for joining today, and we have a special gift that we're going to give away at the end. I think we're all ready for winter to be over and spring to be here. So we're going to give away a picnic basket along with a gift card from Omaha Steaks and a bottle of wine from Drizzly. Enter to win by asking a question via the chat window during this webinar. We'll randomly select a winner at the end of the webinar. You must be present to win. Without further ado, let's meet our other presenters for today's session. I'd like to introduce Dave Abbott from Cisco Systems and Rich Perez from the Burwood Group. They'll introduce themselves and then we'll dive into the agenda. Dave, let's start with you. Please take it away.
Hey folks, I'm Dave Abbott. I've been with Cisco for about 6 years now. I'm a cross-architecture technical solutions architect, so it's quite a mouthful, but really I focus in on a SASE architecture. So very much looking forward to the session today.
All right, and good morning, everyone. My name is Rich Perez. I'm the Practice Director for Cybersecurity Advisory Services. I've been with Burwood for about 3 years now, and a lot of my focus deals with the security governance and strategy framework efforts from a cybersecurity standpoint, as well as a blueprinting and architectural standpoint as well, and look forward to interacting with all of you today.
Great, thank you both. So for the agenda today we're going to cover the current business challenges, what is SASE, definition and use cases, and really diving into how to secure the hybrid workforce in today's world. And then we're going to finish it off with how would you as an organization get started on this journey. We're going to give you some ideas and some programs that we have available here at Burwood to help you with that process. So let's get into the first audience poll for the day. And this is a pretty self-explanatory one. And the question that we would like everyone to answer is, does your company's current return to work plan include a hybrid work from home model? If you could, fill out the poll question on the right-hand side of your WebEx. Answer that question, and we'll get the results here in just a minute. Takes a little bit for it to pop up here, so if you've voted, just please hang tight with us for a second. The poll has ended. Well, we must have the results should be coming soon. We'll move forward and come back to that shortly. The reason we were asking everyone that just popped in. So yes, 90% says that they currently have some type of a plan from a hybrid workforce perspective within their organization. So we certainly would like to dig in a little more on that later in our presentation today. So let's move into the current business challenges. Next slide, please. There we go. There we go. Thank you. What we want to talk about today is now most people are working from anywhere, right? At home, on the go, at the branch office, campus offices, with any device from any location. With that shift, the data center is no longer the hub, the user is. And to give them secure access to work resources and applications, users must be treated as a branch of one. With the hybrid workforce environment becoming the new norm, users are connecting in different ways than we did before, right? So according to Gartner, a recent survey, 82% of company leaders plan to allow employees to work remotely, some of the time at least, in this post-COVID manner. Enterprises are adopting a multi-cloud strategy to leverage enterprises connecting to 20 cloud services. 93% embrace a multi-cloud service. So again, here we go with understanding that the world is different today than it was 5 or 10 years ago. A lot of this has to do with the applications are distributed, the users are distributed, and now we've got COVID that's come into the marketplace over the last 2 years that organizations are starting to really see the benefit of having productivity, maintaining productivity during these last 2 years. But what they need is technology to enable their workforce to have a seamless experience, whether they're at their home, whether they're at their business, they're in a hotel, can be anywhere. And that's really what we're trying to achieve here. So as we mentioned in the SASE use case environment, there's a lot of different opinions. I mean, it's Gartner Group developed the SASE term as a framework. So let's dive in a little deeper and really find out what this is about. So with that understanding of the market, let's define the concept. Dave, why don't you start us off? What is SASE?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. I think really to understand the concept of SASE, we have to look back at what our historical architectures looked like. And when you built a typical architecture, no matter what industry you were in, could be you were retail, manufacturing, in healthcare, we typically had a centralized data center or multiple geographically dispersed throughout the world. But that's where the majority of our applications lived. And from a connectivity perspective, we would simply have to have either a private circuit or some form of internet that would get us connectivity from our branch locations back into those data centers. And from a protections perspective, from a security side, it was pretty simple to think about a full stack of security that lived at the edge of that data center. We'd be able to inspect traffic that came in from the branches to the DC, as well as anything that was egressing out to the general web. And then from a remote user, we maybe had 10% of our workforce or less that was actually traveling outside of the barriers of what we call the traditional perimeter. And so from a connectivity perspective, we bring it all back into the data center. I'd have the defined perimeter, I'd have my security stack that lived at the edge, and most of my traffic was destined for my internal data centers because that's where my applications lived. But if we look at some of the concepts that Scott's talking to, we've seen a holistic flip into where applications live in the modern age. We're primarily digesting more SaaS-based applications or infrastructure as a service. Maybe we're using more co-located and co-hosted environments rather than running our own data center. And on top of that, we have a lot more general internet traffic out there. We're simply just using more of the internet to do our day-to-day jobs as well as for our recreational purposes. And you couple that fact with more folks working from home now, more than ever due to COVID, you now have this inherent bottleneck that exists within your data centers. And the challenge becomes connecting our end users to those applications in a faster manner. And we're not going direct, not because we don't have the technology, it's usually because we've invested a significant amount of money into our security stack that lived in the data center. We created this perimeter that is artificially not required anymore. When we analyze how our end users are actually working nowadays, we don't need to be sending this into a data center for inspection. And that's where SASE comes in. Ultimately, what we're trying to do is provide a from anywhere to anywhere type of unified deployment, where I have a networking and security fabric that works for me and gives my end users access to their applications faster without compromising my security. It allows me to check the box on compliance and my regulatory needs and the visibility across my environment. And what we find is for many customers, they're actually getting better security capabilities and performance by leveraging a cloud native architecture than trying to worry about hardware on prem and what code base they're running and scanning for vulnerabilities and not being able to digest the latest and greatest technology because they don't have the hardware or compute resources to be able to host those services. And when you move into a cloud native model, it allows you to connect your end users and your branch locations into this fabric seamlessly. This not only helps you to simplify your operations, but it also helps you to minimize that risk because you have a unified policy for wherever your workers are from. So when we think about SASE, there's primarily two use cases that we're looking to address, or at least two starting points. The first becomes your hybrid workers, the ones that are working from home, or maybe they travel around branch to branch, branch to HQ, or work out of their house half of the week and come into the office for the other half. The ones where we still need protections no matter where they work from. They're not locked down to a specific desk. And the other side is the secure edge, where we're constantly innovating of protecting our branch resources and ensuring that where we have a physical presence continues to be secure. But rather than having to bring it back all into that data center, enabling the business to be able to adopt cloud native technologies much faster and to be able to leverage the same protections we have for our end users across to our other devices, printers and IoT, maybe contractors or guests where we have unmanaged devices. They need just as much security as our employees do.
That's great, Dave. Thanks for that. That was awesome. That how we position that to really where the major problems are that businesses are struggling with today. And one of those big areas that you mentioned was that seamless user experience, no matter where they are. In the past, when we were in our corporate, our campus facilities, we had access to certain things because we were there. And when we went home, in many cases, it was drastically different, right? And one of the advantages that this platform brings to the table is that I'm able to provide a seamless experience no matter where the user is. They could be in another country, they could be in a remote location, or they could be in their headquarters or data center. And the same policy applies to that user no matter where they are. So I'm not managing different components by location. I'm managing users, not locations. And therefore, I can get much more granular into my security posture because I can build in a security infrastructure that says you are a power user or you are a marketing user, you have access to certain things. So we really extend ourselves and even further into the ZTNA architecture that we're all trying to get to as well. So that's an awesome demonstration there of the power of this platform and this framework. So now we're going to move on to how organizations, what they should be looking at from a hybrid workforce planning consideration, right? I mean, this is really what we're here to talk about, the nuts and bolts of it. And what we believe the things that organizations should be looking at in order to effectively plan for this new hybrid workforce era is these four pillars that we want to consider today. And that is that obviously organizations today are not embracing hybrid workforce because it's anything other than we've now got the test run over the last 2 years that productivity has actually been really good. If you look at the numbers of productivity, fantastic compared to where everybody thought it would be if we sent everybody home and they all work from home. So really the purpose behind a hybrid workforce is that you want to maximize your productivity, be able to provide the same work experience no matter where they are and by their location. And that's what we mean by developing systems that enable organizations to achieve the highest level of productivity across all lines of business. The next one is the design to scale. It's real important whenever we consolidate. For those that got bit by the COVID initial wave of COVID workers going home, a lot of these VPN type, to the data center solutions were underscaled, right? So they were typically, maybe have a few hundred or a few thousand users that may be traveling on that day that would be using that system, and you would go from that size to in some instances 20 to 30 to 40,000 people that were now trying to work from home. So those systems didn't scale very well. Well, one of the things that we get from a cloud-based solution is elasticity and scalability. So that's something that we want to consider. Employees at various work sites, whether it's remote silo locations or microsites to traditional concentrated facilities, offices and factories and retails, they're all going to be working from home at different times. So we don't have this static ability to predict how much capacity we need. So we need to build a system that has that elasticity to it, that can scale on demand, that we don't have to worry about who's at home and who's not, right? So the next thing is that user experience. One of the biggest challenges that we had in those legacy types of VPN solutions is if a lot of your activity and work was to the cloud, you were being what we call a hairpin back to the data center to then go to the cloud. If my data center is in the East Coast and I'm happen to be traveling on the West Coast, and I'm accessing a site that may be on the West Coast, I'm traveling back and forth twice across the United States. Latency and user experience was not good. One of the advantages to this type of a cloud-based system is that our user experience is much more deterministic. We're able to provide you the lower latency drop-off point for you to access those systems, whether it's in the cloud or in your data center facility. So that's another reason why when we look at this, that a planning consideration has to be, what is my user experience and how am I going to improve it? The next one is secure access. Obviously, this is great, right? For those that are not in the security realm of their organization, we're usually dealing with an operation or a user satisfaction side of the house. But how do we address security when we're distributing applications and users across the United States or the globe? How do we consolidate and provide that unified security policy no matter where they are? All of these considerations fit very nicely into what we're talking about today, and we have solutions for this. So as we move into the next part of this, one of the issues that we'd like to also discuss today is the compliance side. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Rich, and he's going to talk a little bit about how compliance plays a key factor in this platform.
Absolutely. Thank you, Scott. So, with the growing shift towards cloud services and remote workforce enablement, as we discussed earlier, it obviously has a potential to create some regulatory challenges. That being said, what we see now with the adoption of SASE, there's a shrinking percentage of business traffic that terminates within the enterprise. While that's beneficial, it obviously creates some challenges. In one area in particular, as organizations struggle to maintain visibility to enforce security policies and business-related traffic, as well as the single pane of glass initiatives, now you have a little more disbursement in which to get a handle around. So, in addition to that, by having cross jurisdictional boundaries that you enable through the introduction of a much wider and diverse workforce, this may also introduce some regulatory requirements that you may have not taken into consideration for, and may actually create some areas of non-compliance. So, for example, if you have workforce that kind of now expands beyond the boundaries of North America or even within Europe, there may be factors such as like GDPR, for example, that you'll have to kind of weigh in and take in consideration as part of your overall boundaries as it relates to compliance. So with that, there's obviously some inherent security risks with that. So public cloud services are a bigger target for cybersecurity attacks. We've seen that recently, even with, for example, like Kronos. But what you know today may not be what you plan for later. So we have to take that in consideration. A lot of organizations are obviously revisiting what their critical business application requirements are. And obviously, the compliance aspect of that, in particular with privacy, these are key things that we have to weigh in as we go forward. So policy managed systems, as we've talked about here, they push policy changes quickly. And with that, have that central use and capability in which to provide enforcement. These cloud delivered solutions are therefore a better business approach given that centralized management. And again, as we go through these slides, we'll also be discussing some of the benefits to address some of the concerns around the visibility aspects as well.
Thank you for that, Rich. Let's talk a little bit about the key challenges. Dave, you want to kind of start us off with this?
Yeah, what's interesting that I've seen on both securing the workforce and securing the edge for that matter is a challenge around visibility as well as for control for access into applications. And, I worked with a number of clients back in early 2020 that as they had to all of a sudden do a knee-jerk reaction into supporting remote work for everyone, they didn't have a great model of support. And what they usually went out and did was they would go beg some vendor for some VPN licenses and maybe some additional virtual appliances or additional VDI. And that way they could get users connected into the enterprise. And it was simply because they still needed the visibility, still needed the connectivity of as if they were on-prem still. And what we learned is that wasn't okay for just a 90-day period. We're 2 years into this beast and it's still not going away. And we've hit a point now with employees where they expect to have the ability to work remote. And so what's interesting is those trial licenses that they got for 60, 90 days became a procurement process to go and buy those additional VPN licenses. And it turned out that then supporting that was an absolute headache, as well as trying to manage all these users now terminating and eating up bandwidth in our data centers. And when they're all going to these applications that weren't even running within the DC that they were headed for. So the modern challenge in securing that workforce and the workplace is how do I ensure I've got visibility and security for no matter where that end user is going to? And recognizing that for many organizations, a full tunnel VPN has been okay, but there are better practices these days because of where our applications have shifted towards into a SaaS-based or co-located environment or infrastructure as a service. And it's quite interesting as we work through some of these challenges about how different customers are adopting it on a per verticalized basis. But the general consensus is we need to get off of the full tunnel VPN type architecture and move into some form of a zero trust or software defined perimeter type model.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I mean, one of the things that we see a lot of organizations, dealing with it, you mentioned that visibility, but it's that manageability, right? As we're distributing locations and applications to more and more places, the complexity to manage all of those, endpoints, applications, and where the users are becomes very difficult to manage. So if I'm able to carry my credentials with me wherever the application may live, I'm able to build a policy based upon my membership or my individual user ID that traverses the entire enterprise. I'm able to manage at a much more efficient pace than I did before with all these different endpoints that were typically just layer 4. Maybe they've migrated to layer 7, firewalls, but now you're doing it and you're inspecting traffic 3 and 4 times as you hop from one place to another to follow the network path. You've got, and each one of those network paths typically had some type of security instantiated at that endpoint. Now you've got to inspect it again, right? And so that just adds latency and really affects the user experience. That we're trying to push the user experience to the point where it doesn't matter where they are. So not only is it easier to manage, but I've got a better user experience. That's a win-win. Rich, you want to add anything to this before we move on?
Yeah, the only thing I was going to add, Scott, and thank you, was that with respect to having, a handle around the evolving threats, one of the aspects that we did touch on, and probably good to expand on well beyond the regulatory space, is the cyber insurance space. So having a handle and having a strategy that really addresses around those evolving threats really gives you a leg up in terms of maintaining the evolving goalpost movements that we're seeing, from a cyber insurance perspective.
Yeah, that's another good point. So let's move on to the secure access for the hybrid work. To dive a little deeper, right? Let's get a little bit deeper into this. Dave, you want to start us off?
Yeah, so I think what it comes down to is exactly what Scott talked about earlier, that we're ultimately trying to help reduce costs by simplifying our operations, by improving the user experience that allows your business to adapt new services more agilely rather than hindering the business, and ensuring that they get direct application access. And then, of course, minimizing risk, just as we talked about. An interesting stat, we've actually seen a 600% growth in the quantity of cyber attacks that exist globally. And it's primarily because malicious actors are well aware that folks are now working from home and they're a lot more vulnerable when they're outside of that traditional perimeter. And the challenge becomes, if we're just solely relying on endpoint protection to, solve all of our challenges, there's always going to be a risk there. And we have to be able to approach this with a defense in depth type model, but without hindering the business. And so,
Right.
in order to do that, we really have to take this unified approach of your worker and location goes through the same type of networking and security fabric, no matter what application they go to. And we talk about SASE, it's that convergence of networking and security coming together, and then utilizing middle mile optimizations and peering relationships to give you that better digital experience. So, from a network side, we're leveraging SD-WAN at our edge to do policy-based routing and application-aware routing, segmentation, and east-west visibility and inspection on that traffic, but as well as automation to be able to give us uh, direct tunnel access to our security platforms. So rather than having to manually spin up tunnels and manually monitor that infrastructure, we use SD-WAN automation to create that infrastructure spun up for us. And then in that security stack, and especially when we talk about the remote worker, we need to be able to provide more than just endpoint protection. And we go beyond simply DNS security as well. It's now getting into a full web proxy where we are implementing inline inspection, decryption, file type protections, remote browser isolation, file control, as well as IPS, layer 7 firewalls. I mean, the list continues to grow in terms of what's capable nowadays in a cloud based security toolset. And it's what many customers are asking for. In fact, most are not willing to give up that security stack that lived in the data center unless they're able to have a parity or like for like solution that lives within the cloud. And today, we're there. We're able to provide those same capabilities as well as things like data loss prevention in line and CASB type rule sets and controls. All of these are vital for protecting our workforce, no matter whether they're working from home or they're within the office. That's the end net solution for what a hybrid work strategy looks like in the modern era with applications living in all these distributed systems.
I totally agree with you, Dave. I think that what we're really the one piece that we didn't really touch on, but it's out there. It's really part of a broader vision, is the ability for us to drive down costs, and yet we're going to expand our capabilities. And one of the ways in which we do that, once we have a SASE type system deployed, is if now we can integrate identity and access management in with that system, and we can then wrap lifecycle management for user around that, we'll really start to drive the operational numbers down for businesses to manage not only multiple security endpoints and postures, but we can do that much quicker because it's all software defined. It's based upon identity and how that rotates around your environment. Instead of it being a physical IP address and port or network address and port, now we just use identity, and we use identity to actually map that security into your infrastructure and your architectures. We really drive that cost down for what it takes to manage users. So it's really a cost model that makes a lot of sense for a lot of organizations. With that, we'd like to move on to our next poll. And this is not a good spot to have this poll after all this discussion we just have. And the question that we'd like to pose to everyone on the call today is, does your organization have a strategy that aligns to the information that we discussed? Now, as you're thinking about this, you remember the first poll question we had was, do you know if your organization has a hybrid work strategy plan, right? And that's 90% of you said that there's some type of hybrid work model in place or going to be in place within your organizations. That's great. Now we're asking you, do you think that you're ready for that? right? So this is a way in which you're going to identify how bad do you need SASE today. So please, yes or no on the question there, or there's a sort of. Get those in, and we'll wait a few minutes. There's a little bit delay when the results come back to us before we move on. All right, the poll has ended. So about 20 seconds for those results to come up to us. While we're waiting on those, we're gonna kind of, for those of you that are answering this question and hope, and if there's a lot of yeses, that's great. If you have a solution, it's great. But really, SASE, the framework itself, is a combination of several things, and not many organizations tackle it all at once. It's a journey. There's certain pieces of the steps that you need to go through to do that. And we're going to kind of get into a little discussion about how we can help you start that journey here in a minute. So the results of the poll, 33% said yes, 22% said no, and 22% were sort of, right? So it's really a mixed bag there. That's an interesting result. So let's move on to how do we, for those that don't have a strategy that aligns to that, or maybe that you're unsure, let's move on to how we help you define that strategy. There's a little delay here after we come out of the poll that we're dealing with here, so bear with us. The next slide will advance in just a minute, just a second, hopefully. Here we go. All right, well, hopefully the keyboard will unfreeze on that end, and there we go. Takes a few minutes. So Dave, talk to us about how we can build this customized journey and what those components are.
Yeah, I think the thing to recognize in this is we're talking about a lot of different technology that can enable the business, and it's difficult to try to tackle it all at once. And what we see with most customers that I work with is they usually start with one of these building blocks, whether that's implementing the cloud security or moving away from VPN and into more of a zero trust network access type model. They might be looking at leveraging SD-WAN across branch protections and optimizing that application experience for those branches, or utilizing observability to get a baseline for their environment and be able to understand how applications perform today, how they're currently being routed, as well as then helping them to implement these other solutions and then provide day two operations and visibility. So at the end of the day, this does become a journey, and it's up to you all to decide on which direction you're going to start, because we want to be able to utilize these different building blocks to build that holistic solution, but we usually need to have an understanding of what is most important to your business and where you want to get started first.
Great, thanks for that. Thank you for that, Dave. So the part of that journey that Dave spoke to is that we need to develop that. And here at Burwood, we have the tools to help you develop that journey and develop that roadmap. And we call it a visioning workshop. So if you're interested in focusing on your priority use case, and they're usually different for every organization. If you're interested in prioritizing that and get a customized secure cloud roadmap for your organizations, we can help you. We identify your priorities relative to securing your users and apps and devices. We evaluate your current policies and learn how to simplify while centralizing threat management. We talked a lot about that centralization and that ability to manage more with less on the backside, right? And we can help you build a roadmap and an architecture plan to define something that's specific to your organization to get you where you want to go, and for secure access and enterprise resources. So there's a link here. Everyone will have a copy of that. So we have this Burwood.com secure-cloud networking link that's with embedded within here. Please go there and sign up. We'd love to sit down and really dive deeper into your specific use cases and needs. So let's jump right into the Q&A with the time we have left. If you could, let me check our chat window here. There's a Q&A button within your WebEx console. If you could, if you'd like to pose a question to the panel here, we'd be glad to answer that for you. Give you just a few minutes to do that. While you're doing in your questions, we've got a question 2 here already loaded up, so that's great. Question from one of the participants is, to validate my understanding, this is working with SASE over Cisco's SD-WAN with a physical hardware device in every remote location. Is that correct? This is added into ICE rules and configuration as well. Well, Dave, why don't you take that one, specific to
happy
Cisco?
to. I think it's a fantastic question. So there's a couple ways that you can approach protecting the remote worker. One is absolutely with hardware using SD-WAN. And I actually, as I was reading that, I was thinking back to one of my healthcare customers I worked with developing a SASE solution about a year ago. They were running Meraki MX for SD-WAN across all of their remote locations and into their data center. But they were having to spin up different pop-up COVID locations, as well as for some physicians that would travel into other remote areas where they didn't have a constant physical branch presence. They would do these pop-up events all over the state. And what they did was they procured about 20 of the MX Z3Cs. And what those are is just a lightweight branch SD-WAN device that can be used for a handful of users. And you simply just need an Ethernet handoff to any internet connection. And it automatically builds an SD-WAN tunnel into your private infrastructure. And then, yes, you can absolutely utilize ICE to do authentication for the users that are logging into that remote SD-WAN pop-up. That was one use case that worked extremely well for them, because they might have had a physician and several nurses that needed to be able to have hardwired access as well as provide wireless. And the Z3C also had a 4G LTE capability where they loaded a SIM card into it and they could build SD-WAN wirelessly over a cellular connection if there wasn't a reliable internet connection. So now they're able to leverage connectivity to the on-prem application assets, use the same authentication methods they're used to, and get internet connectivity securely through that SD-WAN fabric. But I want to just call out that that's simply a matter of leveraging the SD-WAN component side. What we primarily talk about with remote workers is they're just traveling around with a laptop and it's not cost effective to buy a piece of hardware for every device. We're simply talking about a lightweight agent that is running as a forwarding proxy for your web traffic. And into that web proxy, it's performing all of the inspection of that traffic. DNS security, deep packet inspection with TLS decrypt, being able to run file type controls, file analysis, and sandboxing, remote browser isolation, data loss prevention, CASB. That list just is massive in terms of what we can do off a single lightweight client. And this is simply a software shell that runs on that managed device. The other half of protecting your applications is through identity policies and zero trust access. And so what we do is we take Duo for not just multi-factor authentication, but also device posturing and health and trusted endpoint protections to be able to protect all of our applications, whether they're a SaaS-based or if they are in infrastructure as a service or if they're living on-prem. And so that type of protection gives a unified policy for all of our remote users, no matter which application they're hitting. So we now have inline inspection to the web traffic as it goes outbound, as well as zero trust policies that live across all of our applications. And that doesn't require any hardware.
Great, thank you for that. The only thing I'll add to that, Dave, is we were speaking, there's really two components here, and we talked about that early in our presentation to address that, right? It's like, that is the edge, the secure edge component of this, and the other piece of that is the hybrid work environment. Typically is going to be remote, away from the location. But the benefit of organizing and utilizing this strategy is that whether I'm at a coffee shop or I'm in my office, I have the same security policy and access, right? So to answer the question, relating to SD-WAN, SD-WAN is a part component of the secure edge. but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's all that it is, right? So there's a differentiator there for how we're servicing that client, whether it's within a facility that has SD-WAN, or if you don't have SD-WAN, you could be in any location, anywhere that has internet access and gain that same security policy that you have if you had SD-WAN. So let's move on to another question. We've got a lot of them popped up here.
Scott, I want to make sure we hit Jake's here first because he was the first one in about service management portal. Did you see that?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, up top there. Is there a service management portal who has visibility and access, an OEM partner, or can our security team own that?
Yeah, so when it comes down to that, I think it really is a matter of how you want to digest these capabilities, whether you as a security practitioner want to manage it yourself, or if you want to leverage some form of a professional service or managed service that Burwood could potentially offer. There are absolutely native tool sets that come with these products and capabilities as a cloud-based dashboard that you're able to go in and manage and create policies and have reporting tools on the type of traffic your end users are sending. And as well as from an authentication perspective and zero trust policy, see who's accessing all of your applications, SaaS, infrastructure as a service, and private app, and what device they're coming in with, where that device is originating from, country and end user behavior analytics, et cetera. So there's a lot of analytics and data that you can leverage with these tool sets natively.
Great, thank you for that, Dave. So we have time for a couple more quick ones. I'm going to hit an easy one here. Is MS Intune considered part of SASE? No, that's really more MDM. So we're not really considering that as a part of SASE, although there is a component there that is similar. Let's look
Scott,
into.
I'll just make a quick call out on that if you don't mind. We can leverage MS Intune to deploy the software agent that runs our web gateway. So for that reverse proxy to be able to be enabled, if you have MS Intune on all of your managed devices, that makes it a lot easier to deploy that agent out. So we can leverage an MDM to look at device health, create policies around device health, ensure that we're up to date on OS code, et cetera. And that can be a complementary capability to this holistic SASE approach.
Good point. Yeah. So for a deployment standpoint, there's a complementary piece of that. Got that. So I think we have time for one more question. And let's look at, let's use this one. What are some of the questions that my organization could or should be asking to see if it's appropriate for the SASE journey? Well, that's a good question. Some of the questions that you have is the polling questions that we had earlier today, right? Does your organization currently have a hybrid workforce plan that they're either going to deploy or that they're working on? And if they do, and if we're not going back to normal, right, whereas everybody came into the office, then that would be a good indication that you should be looking at SASE to help initiate or to actually enable that hybrid work from home model. So using those polling questions can give you that answer. Dave, you want to add anything to there?
Yeah, I think ultimately it comes down to one, where do your applications exist and what is that long-term journey or strategy for your applications in moving to the cloud, or are you keeping it on-prem? And then two is, what's your long-term strategy for where your workers are going to be? And I think when you combine those two, we now have to figure out connectivity and security across, getting my end users to those applications. And SASE becomes an inherent tool set or framework we can leverage to provide that unified policy and connectivity across all of your environments.
Rich, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, the one thing I was going to add real fast was just the fact that you might want to examine and take a hard look at, from a capacity and resource management perspective, look at the solutions that you have in place that may be qualified from as part of the SASE journey, and those can be items in which you may want to prioritize on.
Right, great. Okay, thank you so much, Rich and Dave, and thanks to all of you for joining us and listening and participating today. I encourage you to connect with any of our presenters or myself directly with any questions. See our contact information here. We'd love to tailor future topics to our attendees' challenges and asks. When you close your WebEx window, there's a little survey that'll pop up. If there's anything specific that you want to recommend for our third and final session, please leave us a comment. With that, I'll wrap this up and announce the raffle winner we talked about at the beginning of the webinar. Let's see if we have it yet here. I'm not seeing it come up on my screen yet for the winner of the raffle. Well, I guess I could just take it myself. I'm sorry. Okay, great. So we do have a winner, and congratulations to James Whistler. You are the proud owner of a Omaha Steaks gift card, a wine from Drizzly, and a picnic backpack. So thank you so much for participating today. And with that, I'll wrap this up. Thanks again for joining Burwood and Cisco, and we hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you.